Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coaching Conversations. Today, we're going to be speaking to you about the simplest way that you can reduce the expenses in your business. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coaching Conversations with Nick and Tony Crossan, our resident money man at UpCoach. Tony, how are you today?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks. Yeah, awesome. Had a great weekend. So, yeah, it's nice to get back into the flow this week. And great to be here talking to you.
Yeah, cool. Today, we want to talk about the simplest way, the easiest way to reduce the expenses in your business. Now, anyone who's listening to this, expenses are made up of many things in your business. It could be materials costs. It could be your telephone bills. It could be your rent. It could be your wages. There's lots of things that build expenses into businesses. And for a lot of business owners, this is something that they struggle with in some respects because they're trying to reduce them, but they're also trying to grow their sales as well. So when you're trying to grow sales, you might need to add on more employees or buy more materials, whatever you might need to do. So trying to reduce that expense number or numbers within your profit and loss can be a challenging thing. So today I want to break that down. Tony, what's your advice? Do you have some overarching advice or the simplest way that people can actually start doing this? What have you got to share?
I think the thing that I got from when I had my business, Chris, was, and I took this from when I was more in the corporate world, working with the big airlines and stuff like that, is that I sort of found that it was quite cyclic for them to have a big purge on reducing expenses. Every 3 months, it almost sort of came round. It was a bit like the dark cloud that would come over. And what that did is it sort of really helped me to sort of, understand, why they did it, but also what they did as well.
Right.
I think if you can get into sort of like almost programming yourself to sort of go, this isn't a once a year thing that you do, or it's not just when, a certain sort of event comes around, it's like, oh my God, like COVID at the moment, it's like, oh, we've got to look at reducing our costs, this, that, and the other. It's like, you should actually get into, trying to get into like a routine that says every 3 months, review, if you like, your expenses and see what it is that you can chip away at, and rather than it sort of being one big exercise.
Sure. Okay. So what you're saying here is it needs to be more of a consistent approach rather than I'll do it once and forget about it. It's actually something that you need to keep up a routine of.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Chris, I know that we've done this a few times, and I've explained this to a lot of people, particularly in UpCoach.
Yeah.
And one of the things that again I learned in my early airline days was a thing called managing the two lines apart. And that to me was almost sort of like the fundamentals of what you were doing when you were a business owner or anybody that came into your business, managing the two lines apart. So the line that goes up is your sales, the line that goes down is your costs. And basically your job is to manage those two lines as far apart as you possibly can.
Right. So kind of like
just like
sales going up, costs going down.
And so your job is that bit in the middle of managing those two lines apart. So everybody's got a big push on growing sales. But how many people have the same amount of effort and time and energy reducing their costs? Because again, if you're just pushing that upper line up, but your bottom line is also coming up, the gap in between is where the money is actually made.
Yeah, your profit.
So it requires, exactly that. That's where the profit is, that little bit in between. So as much effort on both sides is really what makes, for a really good business. So think about what the initiatives are that you can do to drive sales up, but also what those other initiatives are that you can constantly do to drive costs down as well.
Right. Okay. So do you have some areas, Tony, or some particular items or things that we should be thinking about in order to reduce those costs? Could you target some areas for us or some ways that we could perhaps do this?
Yeah, I always sort of like to think that the last thing you want to do is to impact what the customer experiences. So if there's anything that you can do that avoids that, then that's normally my first go-to. Don't really try to impact on the customer. Look at anything else that you can do. Then I look at my first glancing eye goes, okay, what are some of the biggest costs that I've got in my business? So if it's, let's say it might be cost of goods, it could be wages, it could be insurances for some companies. It's like, if they are your biggest cost, then any little thing that you do to them is going to have a big impact on your bottom line. So if you can reduce the cost of your employees in some way, shape or form, if you can do without somebody, if you can just lay somebody off for a period of time or put somebody on part-time, that's where the biggest amount of expense is often in any business. I know when I had a business, one of our biggest costs was electricity.
Right.
Yeah, I think, we had the hospitality establishment that me and Aaron used to run, and our electricity bill was like $10,000 a quarter. Yeah.
Holy moly.
Yeah, and it wasn't until, again, I started to look at that and go, what the hell is going on here? So anything that we could do to actually bring that down. And I got one of the ladies in the office to actually sort of go and ring around every single electricity company to see if we could reduce that. Because a 5% reduction in that area, I could almost employ somebody on for the rest of the year.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's looking at the bigger ticket items, Chris, and just seeing what you can do, how you can negotiate, how you can be a little bit more competitive in those areas. That's where the real money is to be made.
Yeah, right. So it's really all about awareness. Like you need to be, and a lot of people, I've spoken about this last week, I think, when we recorded another podcast episode, but it's all about having that awareness and actually taking the time to pull those profit and loss or pull that bank statement out and look at what's going in to the account and what's going out of the account, but also start questioning that because a lot of people don't have that emphasis around what am I spending? And I know this is something that you've spoken to us about before. Sometimes it's not what you're earning, it's what you're spending. It's what's going out. And many people neglect what's going out because they're too focused on what's coming in.
Yeah,
so,
I love that saying, Chris, where it's not about what you make, it's what you spend. That's what's going to make you rich.
Yeah.
When you look at those things, I mean, subscriptions, put it on your calendar every quarter to review the subscriptions that you've signed up to. Because I think everybody's just in that habit of just going, I want that. I want that. I want to Spotify. I want this. I want that. And I look at that and go, hang on a minute. How many subscriptions have I got? And how much does that actually total up to? I've got all these things that I'm subscribed to, but really how many of those do I actually need and how many of them can I get for free if I actually sort of start shopping around?
Yes. I think, something that I've realized with clients before, and I'll give you the story in a second, but I'll call it indiscriminate purchasing. So it's like, oh, we need that tool from Bunnings, we'll just get that. Or I'll shout the boys lunch, we'll get that. Or I'll put the sneaky carton of beer on the business. And that just accumulates over a month. So and you probably do the same thing, with your client base as well, Tony, but we run a spending audit, if you will, or we look at the expenses that are going out every month with our clients. And we break down, what are you actually spending? What's going out? Let's have a look at your P&L and observe this. And I got one of my clients to do a full audit on his expenses. And it turns out that he was spending about $1,000 a month just on, I'll call them indiscriminate purchases, lunch, something from Bunnings, something here, something there. And it was just growing. And even he was astounded. He goes, wow, Chris, I'm kind of like wasting $1,000 a month when if I made my own lunch or if I said no to spending something, I'd make or keep 12 grand a year. Sometimes it's the bit that we keep that is actually the profit. But people don't see it that way. It's because they're already spending it. Oh, well, the business will pay for that. Hopefully next week's good. It's that sort of mentality. If you can switch that around and hold back on that indiscriminate purchasing, that's when you're going to really start seeing the change.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Chris. And I say there's so many of those little things that just become habits, or they just become, things that we don't really consider. And because it's not a large outlay, if we're subscribing something to the month, then we don't actually understand what the full total of that is until we get to the end of the year and we look at our P&Ls and we go, I've just spent $12,000 on subscriptions. What was that for?
Yeah.
That's $12,000 that's gone out of your back pocket, and maybe that's not added any value or any real sort of substance to the business.
No.
So when I talk about sort of that quarterly review, it's like just going through the P&L and just challenging every single thing that you outlay on. And I like to do this with my clients to get them into almost that routine of, here's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to hold your hand, and I'm also going to challenge you so that you can answer me the questions about what that was spent on, or what's that for, or what does that actually bring to the business when you outlay that money. And I find a lot of business owners really struggle when it comes to that, because they don't have that awareness, or they're not looking at these numbers, or they're not really understanding that the costs are just as important as what the sales are in any business.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting what one of the greatest shifts that I've seen with business owners is when they shift that mentality to go from, oh, it's okay, the accountant will tell me the numbers, to no, I'm in control of the numbers, and I'm going to watch what I'm spending, and I don't want to spend $1 because I'd rather save it, or I'd rather put it into the profit account, or whatever it might be. So it's that shift in mentality that really helps people make the adjustment, versus going, I'm too busy and dealing with it at the end of the quarter. Tony, what other advice do you have to reduce your expenses?
I think there needs to be somebody in the business that takes responsibility for it, Chris. I know with a couple of my clients, I'm not going to mention any names because they'll give me a hard time, but where I've got a husband and wife team, and I've got quite a few of those, the wife seems to be the one that's predominantly taking control of the money. She's the one that's paying the bills, but is also, got the purse strings, so to speak. And I quite like that, because they're the ones that seem to be a little bit more, I say, diligent in just making sure that we're only spending where we really need to be spending, and they can follow instructions quite clearly when I tell them that there's no additional spending other than what we need to spend in the business. Where it's sort of just left to, I'm going to say, Mr. Tradie, and he's just out there, and he's a bit sort of freewheeling with everything's not looking at the numbers, not really that aware. That's where we often sort of get the biggest problems. They're the guys that are, take a lot of, retraining, if you like, to get them back on track, but also to sort of, really see what the value and the benefits are of managing the costs.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've got a couple of kind of partnership or husband-wife combos as well that do the same sort of thing. And, one of the things that I get them to do is plan a weekly finance talk. So it might be 30 minutes. How do we go for the previous week? What were our, our large expense areas, like wages, like materials, what kind of cash is expected to come through, and how we're going to afford the bigger bills that we've got at the end of the month, or if we need to pay suppliers or whatever. So, those weekly catch-ups are really beneficial, and it can be on a Saturday afternoon with a beer. It doesn't have to be between, work hours, but it's about having that awareness and then taking ownership for what's happening with the business, rather than letting it get to the end of the quarter. And then there might be an argument about, we don't have any money left, or why isn't that paid, or why we're late on this. So, actually having that opening the communication, I guess, between the two of you, if it's a husband-wife combo, about if the partner's looking after the finances, then the tradie or the, the business operator, call it that, needs to be able to sit down and open up that dialogue around what they can do to change.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the really good things. And like I said, if you don't have somebody that's doing that for you, even sort of charge your bookkeeper, or if you can, your accountant, whoever's helping you with the numbers in your business, then really just sort of, make somebody responsible or accountable for just keeping their eye on it more than anything else, or just asking the questions. I know, that's part of, what I do, with a lot of my clients, but again, there's still businesses that are out there that are not, focused on that. And I think, in in the business environment today, you know, money is the key thing. And if you don't understand how it works, then get some help, or, you know,
Mm,
get to understand it yourself so that you can
mm,
see what impact you can have. You know, what are the things that you can do that are really going to make the business, you know, more profitable at the end of the day. That's really why
mm.
you're in business at the end of it.
Yeah.
And I can't understand why people don't have that sort of level of, like we said, awareness or just knowledge around how it all works.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. Any other advice, Tony, around just being able to reduce or manage those expenses?
Yeah, I think it's looking at finding better ways of doing things as well, in terms
Mm,
of either, you know, automating, systemizing, you know, that can reduce time and effort and energy into doing things. So,
mm,
you know, there's a lot of, you know, sometimes there's a lot of effort that we put into doing what we do, and there's often a lot easier ways of doing it.
mm,
Sometimes, you know, there's a little bit of a, I'm going to say, a fear, or there might be a little bit of sort of hesitation around, you know, us moving from, you know, writing things down on a piece of paper or scribbling stuff out, as
mm,
opposed to having something that's systemized that I'm doing on my phone, my laptop, whatever. Those things can actually sort of, you know, look at driving a lot of your costs down over a short period of time, and then you're just going to benefit from that. For the rest of the year, that's what you've really got to look at. I've spoken to so many businesses recently that have gone through that process, and they would never ever go back to what they were doing before, and they can now start
mm,
to see, you know, or they're reaping the benefits of that small amount of investment, in finding a system or finding a process that's really improved, you know, not only the time but the money that they were actually sort of, you know, spending or wasting,
mm.
in doing sort of exactly the same as what they're doing now. So
Yeah.
anything that you can do to make things better and smarter and quicker and easier and less costly, you know, start to have a look at those things. And if you're not sure, then get some help. You know, that's what you've got to do, is just ask people. And get, you know, comfortable that change is all around us, and the more we can sort of, you know, understand that and get comfortable with it, then the better off we're all going to be, and our businesses will be as well.
Mm. I think the big word you're looking for there, Tony, is efficiency. Like, how do you
Yeah,
become more efficient? Or to a certain degree, how do we become more resourceful?
yeah,
You know, I know that one of the core values of Zappos.com, which was
yeah,
they were, I don't know where they are now, but one of the largest kind of merchandise or merch. They sold ultimately like shoes initially, but then they branched out into other things. But Zappos.com, one of their core values was do more with less.
yeah.
And I think that's the you know, the most simplistic way of looking at it. How do you do more with less in your business? A lot of business owners think they need something and they just go out and buy it. And
Mm,
you know, I've had plenty of instances in the past where I might ask a question, well, can you afford it? Or have you budgeted for that? And people are like, oh, no, but we need it. I'm like, I realize that you need it, but can you afford that right now? Like, have you looked at what's going out? Do you have that amount of money in a profit account or a savings account that you can actually go and buy that outright? If you're going to put, you know, buy that on a loan, how is that going to impact the business? So I guess all of these different questions around becoming more resourceful with what you actually have and what you actually need, and then like I said, doing more with less. How do you how do you serve the same amount of clients, or if not more customers, but do it on the current level of operating expenses that you're currently running?
yeah. That's the key thing. And when you do the sums, when you have a look at the numbers that are associated with that, you can then really start to see, you know, how it works. Like I said, that's what
Mm,
I've been, you know, trying to help, you know, clients see is that, yeah, let's have a look at last year's budget and see what we actually did, or last year's profit and loss. And let's say, okay, let's put another 10% on sales, but let's keep our costs at exactly the same as what they were last year.
mm, mm,
Let's just challenge that. That's what we've got to do this year, because that 10%,
mm.
or, you know, that 10% of sales is all money in your pocket. You know,
That's
it's like
right. Yeah.
straight to the profit line, because
Mm,
there's, you know, we've managed to contain all of the costs that we've got within that. Start to refine those costs, and see where you're spending them to allocate those funds better. And I
mm.
think the other one that I just wanted to mention, Chris, and
Yeah.
again, a lot of people sort of overlook this, and that's to really understand the art of negotiation.
Right. Good.
So
What do
if
you mean by
you,
that?
so what I mean by that, Chris, is that if you don't know what negotiation actually is, read a book, or watch some YouTube videos, or
Yeah.
just listen to podcasts around negotiation, and
Right.
you'll soon start to see that negotiation is primarily a win-win situation. But for you and your business, it's about you trying to actually make sure that you're getting the maximum amount of value out of what it is that you're working with, or who you're working with. So
Mm.
if you're not negotiating, on most elements within your business, you're probably outdoing yourself, a huge amount of money. So by asking your suppliers, or asking your contractors, or asking your even your employees, can you negotiate with them in any way, shape, or form to get more for less? That's basically what you've got to be able to do, and that's the art of negotiation. But it's understanding that there's a way of actually going about that, and if you can sort of just understand the principles of negotiation, and they're
Yeah.
not hard, they're not difficult, and sometimes it's just literally asking the question. So if somebody gives you a price on something, can you ask them for 10% reduction? If you got a 5% reduction as a result of that outcome, you'd still be 5% better off. If you got
Exactly.
5% from 25, 30% of your suppliers, that's going to be a huge amount of money in your pocket.
A huge amount. I think that's a really good point. And some people will be like, oh, well, they won't do that. How do you know? I remember I went to the bank and asked them to see if they could change the interest rate on my business loan back in the day when I had it. And they said, oh, leave it with me. I'll see what we can do. And they came back 0.5% better. And I was like, I just asked the question. If I'd never asked the question, I would have paid that 0.5% on the loan across the whole year.
Of
So you
course.
never really know until you've given it a go. But
Yeah.
I think that's a great point there, Tony, which is really good. So there we go, guys. There's kind of 4 things that I've written down as Tony and I have been speaking. Have a greater level of awareness around your expenses. Know what's going out of the account. Know what you're spending money on, because it's not what you're earning, it's what you're spending. Have accountability, or have someone in charge of making sure that we're looking after those numbers, not just, I'll look at it next week, or I'll look at it next month. Actually, appoint someone, whether it's you as the business owner, or your partner, or whoever does the books, to keep things accountable, or keep you accountable on the numbers. Resourcefulness and efficiency. Like, how do you basically do more with less? How do you grow your sales but maintain the same level of expenses or reduce them? And then learn the art of negotiation, because you never know, you could be getting a better rate. And that applies to lots of things:
Of course.
internet, utilities, phone bills, like,
Electricity.
uniform suppliers, electricity, even down to things like fuel cards. If you're running like fleet vehicles and going to a different supplier for fuel cards and stuff,
Yeah.
you'd be surprised how much money you'll actually be able to save. And I have saved, I can honestly say, and you probably have too, Tony, saved your clients thousands of dollars because we've pushed them to go and start looking at the expenses that they're running in their businesses.
Yeah, definitely.
Any final words, Tony, on reducing expenses, or the simple ways to reduce expenses in your business?
No, I think just try and keep it as simple as you can. Like I said, it's not rocket science, as we said before, Chris. It's easy to do, and doesn't take sort of, a lot of time either. And if it's all about money, which we know it is, then, why wouldn't you be, spending at least, 5 or 10% of your time working out how you can look at reducing your costs as well as increasing your sales.
Absolutely. And you can start that, listeners, today. Like, you could literally print out a P&L right now for the last month and start getting out a highlighter and looking at things that you can work on reducing. That's been great. Thank you, Tony. I know that, writing those points down and sharing them with everyone has no doubt supplied some value to people that are listening and watching this. Thank you so much once again.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Chris. You always make this easy, and hopefully, all of our clients and anybody listening to the podcast can really just sort of take something from this, and hopefully they will prosper as a result from it.
And if you need any help, guys, reducing expenses, or we've talked about P&Ls and you're like, I don't even know what that is, reach out to ask at upcoach.com.au. Throw us a question. We'll get in touch and help you out. No worries. All right. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you all again next week on the next episode of Coaching Conversations. Bye now.